The Mercedes-Benz G-Wagen costs $130,000. No options, no upgrades, just the badge, the boxy shape, and the story that this is the most capable off-road machine money can buy. They should question it. In 1979, the German military ran a formal evaluation. They tested the G-Wagen. They tested everything else. Then they handed the contract to a vehicle that cost a fraction of the price. One most people have never heard of. 10 vehicles on this list did the G-Wagon's job for less money. Sometimes a tenth of the price. Sometimes less than a single G-Wagon service appointment. Stay until number 1. In production since 1965. Number 10. Nissan Patrol G60. In 1962, a Nissan Patrol G60 became the first vehicle to cross the Simpson Desert in Australia, without the use of camels or horses. The G-Wagon would not enter production for another 16 years. That fact matters. Because the G-Wagon is sold on the premise that it represents the pinnacle of off-road engineering. The Nissan Patrol G60 was crossing one of the most hostile desert environments on the planet before the G-Wagon existed as a concept. The G60 was the second generation of the Nissan Patrol, a vehicle designed from the outset for military and utility use. It was offered in short, medium, and long wheelbase versions, powered by a 3.9-litre inline 6-cylinder engine with a 7-bearing crankshaft. An engine built for sustained use under load, not for showroom appeal. The drivetrain was a 2-speed transfer case with part-time 4-wheel drive. The body was steel. The interior was bare. There was nothing on this vehicle that was not there for a reason. The Indian Army recognized this. They commissioned a local variant of the Patrol, known as the Yonga, which entered service in 1969 and saw active combat in the 1971 Indo-Pakistan War. The vehicle performed. Under fire, on contested terrain, in conditions where mechanical failure meant something more than a roadside inconvenience. Various versions of the Patrol were adopted by United Nations agencies and military forces across Asia and the Middle East, not because it was the cheapest option, because it worked. The G-Wagon entered production in 1979. The Patrol G60 had already been doing the G-Wagon's job for 19 years. Current examples in solid running condition sell for between $3,250 and $8,500. A G-Wagon service interval costs more than that. The Patrol G60 did not try to be the most expensive vehicle on the market. It tried to be the most reliable. In the field, those are not the same thing, and only one of them keeps you alive. The G60 crossed the Simpson Desert 17 years before the G-Wagon existed. Does that change how you think about the G-Wagon's reputation, or does heritage not matter to you? Number 9. Suzuki Jimny SJ. The Suzuki Jimny SJ is the smallest vehicle on this list. It is also, by several measurable standards, one of the most capable. Capability in a 4x4 is not about size. It is not about engine displacement or interior leather, or the number of cameras in the parking system. Capability is about what happens when the road ends, and more specifically, what happens to the vehicle's axles, its ground clearance, its approach angle, and its mechanical simplicity when the terrain becomes the kind of terrain that ends other vehicles' days. The Jimny SJ ran a 3-link rigid rear axle and a 2-link rigid front axle, paired with a 2-speed low-range transfer case. That combination, rigid axles and low-range gearing, is the mechanical foundation of every serious off-road vehicle ever built. The G-Wagon runs the same basic principle. So does the Land Rover Defender. So does every military utility vehicle on this list. The Jimny SJ weighs approximately 800 kilograms. The G-Wagon weighs over 2,485 kilograms. On terrain where weight becomes the enemy. Loose sand, soft mud, steep rocky inclines where momentum means loss of control. The Jimny SJ has a structural advantage that no amount of electronic traction management can replicate. It climbed terrain that stopped trucks worth 30 times its price. Not because it was special, because its engineering was honest. Rigid axles articulate. Low-range gearing multiplies torque. A light vehicle floats where a heavy one sinks. Suzuki sold the Jimny SJ in over 100 countries. In mountainous regions of Southeast Asia and South America, it became the default utility vehicle for farmers, rescue services, and anyone who needed to get somewhere a road would never reach. The G-Wagen costs $130,000. The Jimny SJ costs $2,700 used. Both vehicles can cross the same river. One of them has been doing it for 40 years. The other has a touchscreen. 800 kilograms versus 2,485 kilograms on the same trail. If you have driven both, tell us which one actually felt more in control. Because the answer is not what most people expect. Number 8. Fiat Panda. The Fiat Panda. 4x4 weighs 750 kilograms. The G-Wagen weighs more than 3 times that. And in the alpine terrain where both vehicles have been tested, the Panda's weight is not a weakness. It is the point. Steyr-Puch, the same Austrian engineering firm that built the Pinzgauer and manufactured the G-Wagen, supplied the entire drivetrain for the Fiat Panda. Not just the four-wheel drive system, the entire package: clutch, gearbox, power takeoff, 3-piece prop shaft, rear axle, differential, and brakes. All of it shipped from Graz to Fiat's plant at Termini Imerese and fitted to the reinforced body shell. That is not a coincidence. Steyr-Puch understood off-road mechanics better than almost any manufacturer in Europe, and they applied that understanding to a vehicle that sold for less than the cost of a G-Wagon's wheels. The Panda was the first small, transverse-engined production car to have a four-wheel drive system. Its approach and departure angles, combined with its minimal overhangs and ultralight body, gave it a capability profile that larger, heavier vehicles could not match on narrow mountain trails. In the alpine regions of Italy, Austria, and Switzerland, the Panda became the vehicle of choice for mountain rescue services, forest management departments, and smallholders who needed to reach places that full-size 4x4s could not physically fit. Not because it was cheap, though it was, but because it was the right tool for the terrain. The G-Wagen was also tested in alpine conditions. It passed. But the G-Wagen cannot fit on a 1.5 meter trail at 2,000 meters altitude. The Panda can. There is a particular kind of off-road capability that has nothing to do with torque or ground clearance. It has to do with whether the vehicle can physically go where the terrain demands. The Fiat Panda could go places the G-Wagen could not reach, for less than the cost of a G-Wagen deposit. Steyr-Puch built both. The mountain decided which one mattered. Steyr-Puch supplied the entire drivetrain for the Panda, the same firm that built the G-Wagen. Same engineers, same factory, 5% of the price. Still think you are paying for engineering when you buy a G-Wagen. Number 7. Isuzu Trooper First Gen. When the Isuzu Trooper launched in 1981, it did not arrive with a marketing campaign about heritage or legacy, or the Sahara Desert. It arrived with a price tag. That price tag, $8,683 in the US market at launch, was the entire argument. For less than $9,000, a buyer received a body-on-frame 4x4 with part-time four-wheel drive, a solid rear axle geared at 4.555 to 1, and a diesel engine built by a manufacturer whose primary business was commercial trucks. Not lifestyle vehicles, not status symbols. Trucks. The kind of trucks that run all day, every day, in conditions that destroy lesser machines. The Trooper's engineering reflected that heritage. The frame was ladder type, the same basic construction as the military vehicles Isuzu had been building for decades. The suspension was conventional but proven. The transfer case was mechanical, simple, and repairable in the field with basic tools. Armed forces across Asia and Africa deployed the Trooper for patrol and transport duties. Not in the same numbers as the Land Rover or the Toyota Land Cruiser, but in sufficient numbers to establish a record. The record was reliability. Isuzu diesel engines ran. In heat, in dust. in the kind of sustained operational use that exposes every weakness a vehicle has. Many experts considered the Trooper's off-road capabilities on par with legendary models from Jeep and Land Rover. That is not hyperbole from a press release. That is the assessment of people who drove both vehicles on the same terrain and compared what came back. The G-Wagen launched the same year at a price that was already significantly higher. Both vehicles were capable. One of them cost $8,683. The other cost more than any reasonable person needed to spend on an off-road utility vehicle. The Trooper asked a simple question: how much capability do you need? And then it sold you exactly that amount, at a price that made the G-Wagen look like a decision made by someone else's accountant. Same year, same terrain, same military duties. One cost $8,683. The other cost 4 times that. If you had to choose based on capability alone, not badge, which one do you take? Number 6. VROOR 240. The VROOR 240 was built in Romania under conditions that made the G-Wagen's development look comfortable. Romanian engineers in the 1970s had no access to West German suppliers, no budget for advanced testing facilities, and no margin for failure. They built the vehicle anyway. The VROOR 240 was a 2-door, 4x4 off-road vehicle that entered production in 1972 and remained in production in various forms until 2006. 34 years. The same basic vehicle, updated incrementally, serving the same purpose throughout, going places that ordinary vehicles could not go, under conditions that ordinary vehicles could not survive. The chassis was robust enough to carry armored variants. The Romanian military used the VROOR 240 as the platform for the ABI armored car. A vehicle with a welded steel hull, rated against small arms fire and shell splinters, mounted on the standard VROOR 244x4 chassis. An armored vehicle, on a chassis that cost less than $4,000. That tells you something about the structural integrity of the VROOR 240. When military engineers need a base vehicle for an armored platform, they do not choose something fragile. They choose something that can take weight, stress, and punishment without failing. The VROOR 240 was that vehicle. It came in 2-wheel drive and 4x4 configurations, with a range of petrol and diesel engines, including units built under license from Toyota. The final military versions were called the VROOR Dragon. The name was not ironic. The G-Wagen was built with access to Mercedes-Benz's full engineering resources, Steyr-Puch's manufacturing facilities in Graz, and a budget that Romanian engineers could not have imagined. The VROOR 240 was built with what was available. Both vehicles did the same job. One of them costs $4,000 used. The other costs $130,000 new. The Romanian engineers who built the VROOR 240 would find that comparison very easy to explain. Romanian engineers with no budget, no Western suppliers, and no margin for failure built a chassis strong enough to carry an armored vehicle. What does that say about what you are actually paying for with a G-Wagen? Number 5. Santana PS-10. The Santana PS-10 was not supposed to exist. The Spanish company Santana Motor had spent decades building Land Rovers under license. When that license expired, they did what most license manufacturers do not do. They kept going. They took the Land Rover 88 Series 2 chassis, a design dating to the 1950s, and rebuilt it. Heavier body, better corrosion resistance, upgraded drivetrain, Iveco diesel engine, aluminium bodywork. The result was the PS-10, also known as the Santana Enable. It looked like a Land Rover. It was heavier than a Land Rover. And it was built specifically for military use by engineers who knew exactly what military use demanded. The Spanish Army adopted it, not in small numbers, not as a trial, as the standard light utility vehicle for the Ejército de Tierra, the Spanish Ground Army. It carried driver plus up to 8 troops. It had a payload capacity of 1,000 kilograms. It was fitted with a standard NATO towing pintle and could tow artillery pieces up to 3,000 kilograms. It did not stay in Spain. The Santana Anibal Militar deployed to Kosovo as part of the KFOR mission. It deployed to Afghanistan as part of the NATO intervention that ran from 2002 to 2021. In 2017, it deployed to Latvia on the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence Baltic Shield mission, operating in conditions that are among the most demanding for any wheeled vehicle. Frozen ground, deep mud, and the kind of sustained operational tempo that exposes every weakness in a vehicle's design. It came back. It kept running. The G-Wagen also served in military roles. It also deployed to the same theaters. The difference is the price. The Santana PS-10 was adopted because it was capable and affordable. The G-Wagen was adopted by militaries that could afford the premium. Some could not. They chose the Santana. The terrain did not notice the difference. Kosovo, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Latvia. The Santana PS-10 did all 4 NATO deployments at 10% of the G-Wagon's price. Have you ever heard of this vehicle before today? And why do you think nobody talks about it? Number 4. UAZ-469. The UAZ-469 was designed to go where no other vehicle would follow. Not as a marketing claim, as a military requirement. The Soviet Union covered 11 time zones. It contained terrain that no Western manufacturer had seriously planned for, permafrost that swallowed vehicles whole, river crossings with no bridges, mountain passes above 3,000 meters with no roads, and temperatures that dropped low enough to freeze hydraulic fluid in vehicles not designed for the conditions. The UAZ-469 was designed for those conditions from the first sketch. The suspension geometry was set up for maximum articulation on broken ground. The transfer case provided genuine low-range gearing for steep terrain and deep mud. The ground clearance was 300 millimeters, sufficient for obstacles that would stop most vehicles before they began. The body was high, the overhangs were minimal, and the approach and departure angles were steep enough for terrain that would require a winch recovery in a standard 4x4. Soviet military planners did not design the UAZ-469 to compete with the G-Wagen. They had no reason to. The G-Wagen was a Western vehicle built for Western armies on Western budgets. The UAZ-469 was built for an entirely different reality. One where the nearest repair facility might be 500 kilometers away, where spare parts had to be carried on board, and where the vehicle had to be maintainable by a conscript soldier with a basic toolkit and no specialist training. That requirement produced something remarkable. A vehicle so mechanically simple that it could be kept running almost indefinitely, in almost any conditions, by almost anyone. The UAZ-469 has been in continuous production, in updated forms, since 1972. It is still sold new today as the UAZ Hunter. Armies that adopted it decades ago still operate it, not because they cannot afford a replacement, but because the replacement has not proved necessary. The G-Wagen costs $130,000. The UAZ-469 costs $2,000 used. In the field, at the end of a supply line, in the kind of conditions the Soviet military planned for, the more expensive vehicle is not necessarily the better one. Designed for terrain where the nearest repair was 500 kilometers away, maintainable by a conscript with basic tools, still in service today. Name one thing the G-Wagen does better in that scenario. Number 3. Lada Niva. The Lada Niva was not supposed to be remarkable. It was supposed to be practical. Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin had a problem. The commissars responsible for agricultural regions across the Soviet Union were filing complaints. They could not reach the farmers they were responsible for supervising. The roads did not exist. The vehicles they had were not capable of the terrain. People were being left unreachable in regions that covered millions of square kilometers. The solution was the Niva. a vehicle that could be purchased by ordinary Soviet citizens, not just the military, that could traverse the terrain the country actually contained. AvtoVAZ built it on a modified Fiat 124 platform, reinforced for off-road use, with a full-time four-wheel drive system featuring a lockable center differential, independent front suspension, a live rear axle, coil springs all around, curb weight of 1,150 kilograms, over 1,300 kilograms, lighter than a base G-Wagen. The Niva went to Antarctica. It was the first wheeled vehicle to spend more than 10 years there, covering over 40,000 kilometers on the ice and operating at temperatures as low as minus 54 degrees Celsius. It came back. It ran. In 1998, a Niva reached the North Pole, dropped by parachute onto the ice, and driven under its own power, operating at an average temperature of minus 30 degrees. It was the first wheeled vehicle to spend time at the North Pole. In 1999, a Niva set the world record for the highest altitude ever reached by a motorized wheeled vehicle, 5,725 meters on a mountain in Tibet. It competed in the Paris-Dakar Rally. It was adopted by rural rescue services across Eastern Europe, by forest management departments, by anyone who needed to cover ground that other vehicles could not cover at a price that ordinary budgets could support. It is still in production, nearly 50 years after the first example rolled out of the Togliatti factory. The Niva, now sold as the Lada Niva Legend, is still being built, still being sold, still being used in terrain that defeats more expensive machines. The G-Wagen has been restyled, upgraded, electrified, and turned into an accessory for city streets. The Niva has been none of those things. It just kept going where the G-Wagen was afraid to get scratched. Antarctica for 10 years, the North Pole, the world altitude record at 5,725 meters, all at 3% of the G-Wagen's price. If the G-Wagen owners in your city found that out, do you think they would care? Should they? Number 2. Volkswagen Iltis. This is the entry that should embarrass Mercedes-Benz most, because the Volkswagen Iltis did not just match the G-Wagen, it beat it. In a formal military evaluation, conducted by the German government, with both vehicles present. The story begins in the early 1970s. The West German Bundeswehr needed a new light utility vehicle to replace the aging DKW Munger. They issued a requirement. Multiple manufacturers responded, among them Volkswagen, with a vehicle developed by Audi engineers using technology from the purchase of Auto Union, and Mercedes-Benz, with what would become the G-Wagen. The evaluation was rigorous. Both vehicles were tested on the same terrain, under the same conditions, against the same criteria. The Iltis ran a 1.7-litre four-cylinder engine derived from the Volkswagen Golf, paired with an Audi-developed four-wheel drive system that would later directly inspire the Audi Quattro, the drivetrain technology that would go on to dominate the World Rally Championship. The Iltis passed the German government's tests with ease. It was chosen over the Mercedes-Benz G-Wagen, which was described as equally competent but more expensive. Not inferior. More expensive. The Bundeswehr chose capability per Deutsche Mark, and the Iltis won. Production began in 1978. The Iltis was delivered to the German military, the Luftwaffe, the German Navy, and eventually to 8 countries' armies, including Belgium, Canada, Greece, Argentina, Oman, Mali, Cameroon, and North Macedonia. Then, in 1980, Volkswagen entered a team of standard Iltis vehicles, modified only with a larger carburetor and a revised camshaft, in the Paris-Dakar Rally, the most demanding off-road race on the planet, against purpose-built rally vehicles from manufacturers with unlimited budgets. The Iltis finished first, second, fourth, and ninth, a military utility vehicle. Stock, 1 Paris-Dakar. The G-Wagen went on to become one of the most commercially successful luxury vehicles in Mercedes-Benz history. The Iltis went on to be forgotten by everyone except the engineers at Audi, who used its drivetrain to create the Quattro. History remembered the wrong vehicle. This list corrects that. The Iltis beat the G-Wagen in the official German military evaluation, then won Paris-Dakar stock. The G-Wagen got the fame. The Iltis got the result. Which one would you rather own? And be honest about why. Number 1. UAZ-452 Bukhanka. The UAZ-452 Bukhanka entered serial production in 1965. It has not stopped. 61 years, no replacement, no redesign that changed the fundamental character of the vehicle. The same boxy forward control van body, the same ladder frame chassis, the same four-wheel drive mechanical layout. Updated incrementally in detail, never replaced in concept, because the concept has never stopped working. The name Bukhanka means bread loaf in Russian, given by the people who drove it, not the people who built it. A tall square box resembling the dense rye loaves sold in Soviet bakeries, not designed for aerodynamics or curb appeal, built to go places and carry things. The engine sits between the driver and front passenger, maximizing interior volume and keeping components accessible for roadside repair. Fuel ports on both sides feed 2 separate tanks, allowing the vehicle to continue operating if one is damaged or contaminated. The entire drivetrain can be maintained by a person with basic mechanical knowledge and a standard toolkit. It served as a van, minibus, ambulance, command vehicle, and troop carrier, Siberian tiger, Central Asian deserts, Arctic supply routes. Every terrain the Soviet Union contained, and the Soviet Union contained more terrain variety than any other nation on Earth. After 1991, the Bukhanka kept going. The Ulyanovsk plant kept building it. Post-Soviet militaries kept ordering it. Civilians in rural areas who needed something that would start at -40 degrees kept buying it. In 2026, it meets Euro 5 emission standards through engine upgrades. The body has not changed. The G-Wagen is assembled in the same Graz factory, where its original mechanical components were manufactured. It is a genuinely capable vehicle. It is also a fashion accessory, purchased predominantly by people who will never take it off a paved surface. The Bukhanka has no electronic differential locks, no automatic transmission, no infotainment system worth mentioning. It is a tool, built for a purpose, still doing that purpose 61 years after the first one left the factory. 4% of a G-Wagen's price, 61 years, no redesign, still in production, still ordered by militaries, costs 4% of a base G-Wagen. If you owned both, which one would you trust when the road actually ended? Every vehicle on this list made the same argument in a different way. The Nissan Patrol G60 made it by crossing a desert. The G-Wagen had not yet been invented to cross. The ARO 240 made it with Romanian engineering, under impossible constraints. The Fiat Panda made it on a trail too narrow for the G-Wagen to fit. The Volkswagen Iltis made it in a formal military evaluation, and then made it again at Paris-Dakar. The Lada Niva made it at the North Pole, and at 5,725 meters above sea level. The Bukhanka made it by simply continuing to exist, by being so fundamentally correct as a tool that 61 years of automotive progress have produced nothing that does its job better at its price. The G-Wagen is the most famous off-road vehicle in the world, but fame and capability are not the same thing. They never were, and the 10 vehicles on this list have spent the last 60 years proving it. The road ended a long time ago. These are the machines that kept going. The G-Wagen gets the headlines. These machines got the job done. If you think that story deserves a wider audience, like this video, share it, and subscribe. There are more forgotten machines where these came from.